Tonight we're preparing for a performance of King Vidor's 1928 film, The Crowd. It was made towards the end of the silent period, but it sort of sums up some of the ethic of the 1920s of a stock market that was going crazy, an economy that was going crazy, and if we think 1 year later was going to come the crash and followed by the depression. So all this is there in the film with this terrific drive of America towards success in any way you can think of it. But you know, it's to have money, have more money than anyone you know, and the way people get crushed because of this ethic. And so I'm very aware of this because I grew up with this in the United States. I was born in the 1930s, so my parents were the children of the Depression. They lived through that. And so when I saw this film for the first time in the sense of having to write music for it, I was very taken with it. I feel it's almost a timeless story. You could take this film and say this is today, this is 2017, and it's still the same story. People are still there, in this overexcitement about, in a way, the American ethic. In order to tell the story, I also wanted to say something about American culture, because the 1920s were known as the Jazz Age, and in the center of the Jazz Age for me was always George Gershwin. So this is the man who symbolized musically about how to take jazz from the clubs and the nightlife and day life of New Orleans and Chicago and New York, and put it into a concert hall. So with Rhapsody in Blue. Rhapsody in Blue was 1925, and that was a very revolutionary piece to write, of taking a symphony orchestra and have it play in jazz style. So some of that is in this film, and my score alternates between a classical statement through some of it, and then it goes to the street and the sort of life of really quite ordinary people. A secretary marries an insurance clerk, and they raise a family, and then there's a tragedy that occurs which almost destroys the man. But the man has a little bit of talent, a little bit something, so that he could stand out from the crowd, and that is, he has a knack for limericks or for catchy lines, that would be very useful in advertising. And so their one moment of luck is that he manages to win a competition with one of his little commercials, and then it's their doom. They get some money, but then they have a tragedy in their life, and it sort of spoils everything. At the end, there seems to be some sign of recovery and some hope, but there's always the idea that he would be lost. But throughout my score, there's a dialogue really between the jazz, which always has uplift, or it has blues, which is for tragic in tone, and then the classical world, which is the world of emotion and the world of the heart, really, for me. And so they alternate, and sometimes the orchestra stops and we just have a little jazz group, and sometimes it comes together. So this was a great thing for me to write, to express that side. I lived in New York principally for the first 23 years of my life, really. So in my heart, I am American somehow. But then afterwards, in 1960, I moved to England, to London in England, and that's where I've lived until today. So it was in a way, even though I wrote this score in 1981, it was a way for me to, I thought, use my life, my younger life, in this way, through what I knew and what I felt and what was around me at the time.